Welcome, Wargamers, to the heart-rending Mortal Realms. Today we're talking about the lore that came out in the newest Daughters of Khaine battle tome. Now, for those who are new to AOS or the faction, I'm going to create a very simple breakdown for you. The Daughters of Khaine are a faction that is full of guile and deceit, and above all, murder. Morathi, for the longest time, essentially pretended to be the high priestess of a cult that worshipped Khaine, the god of murder of the elves in the old world. She essentially had a murder cult that fed power back into her. She was lying and saying, oh, this is going into Khaine to bring him back, and she was basically siphoning it all into herself, increasing her own arcane abilities. And so it's this great scheme, this lie, internal, like within her own faction, and of course external, meaning how the Khainites responded and reacted to everyone around them. Only the Melusai and Khaine, these are the snake ladies and the bat ladies, the kind of mutants and that kind of stuff, knew the truth, that this was all about Morathi herself, that all this religious artifice was a lie, and that Morathi was so filled with ambition because she wanted to achieve one thing, and that is godhood. I have an entire playlist for Daughters of Khaine content, and that's going to be in the description down below. It goes over things like their origins, Morathi's physical corruption within the belly of Slaanesh, and covers the various units and how they relate to her. So if you're interested in learning more about Daughters of Khaine, go ahead and check that out. This is just going to focus on some of the more updated aspects here. But I want to jump in with the assumption here that you know at least a passing level of the Daughters of Khaine lore, because rather than an entire lore week where I essentially redo the same videos over and over again, I really wanted to investigate the changes lore-wise that this book brings up, because it does bring us up to speed. If you haven't read it for yourself, it covers the events of Broken Realms Morathi, the latest, as of recording, narrative supplement that's come out, and basically I have a full playlist for that narrative breakdown. It's one of my favorite stories that Games Workshop has put out. But in that story arc, it ends with Morathi achieving godhood and drawing a line in the sand against Sigmar and the rest of the Pantheon by sacking and claiming the city of Anvilgard, renaming it Har Curon. Of course, we've spoken about that already, but we're going to talk about a few specific questions that I had lingering, and I bet you do too. So again, that's two playlists for you to check out. One that's all about Daughters of Khaine, and the second one is Broken Realms Morathi. Highly recommend you check out the Daughters of Khaine one first, so you have kind of a base understanding of what that faction is like, and Morathi herself, before jumping into Broken Realms Morathi. Okay, so my first question here was, do the elves in the faction still worship Khaine at all? So if you don't know, the witch elves and the Sisters of Slaughter, basically the what I'm going to call a traditional elven, mortal type things, they were under the assumption that Khaine, god of murder, was a cyclical god, which of course he is, and that at some point he would come back. And so this whole point of their religion and their, practice on the battlefield was to empower Khaine, with Morathi, kind of leading them on to think that all these things were going to bring back the god of murder, but in fact it was feeding her. So the question then becomes, or at least for the longest time, the question is, what happens when they find out that they're being lied to, right? What happens to Morathi? However, that question changed, because now it's like, okay, well, Morathi got what she wants. She ascended to godhood. So that kind of puts, I guess, an end to the fear of what happens if they find out, because at this point, it's like, it doesn't really matter. You're not going to kill her. However, I think about their worship. What do they perceive as having happened now that Morathi is different? Well, after this grand, mega ritual that saw Morathi ascend to godhood and split in two, where now she is both the elven version, the illusion, and the giant snake lady that's, a wrecking ball. The sense that I get from the battle tome is that essentially all the mortal elves, or at least, witch elves and that kind of stuff, view it as if Khaine himself had basically possessed Morathi, that he is both aspects and that he used her as a vessel. When Morathi speaks, she still goes by Morathi, but she speaks to you and you believe that Khaine is speaking to you. Now, there are still temples that represent Khaine in his, we'll say masculine aspect, which is traditional stuff. That's the big, Rio de Janeiro pose statue that you get on the back of the cauldron and that kind of stuff. He can be his own unit as well, I suppose. And that is still there. It's still valid. What they're looking at is how different temples and sects of the Daughters of Khaine view their deity. Some view him as the masculine warrior on the battlefield. Others, the feminine leader with decisive action, in which case you would look at Morathi. So that's kind of their kind of juxtaposition that they're stuck in. It does say that Morathi is going through great lengths to, over time, change the culture of the Daughters of Khaine to where basically all representation of Khaine is Morathi. Trying to really basically work the PR angle and build it up as if, no, Khaine is a feminine form, and hey, I'm his embodiment, no longer goes by prophetess. This is truly Morathi Khaine. Khaine in the Realms is a female form now. And so it's a matter of kind of springing this on the cult and kind of shifting their perspective to be oh, okay, you got to get them on board, and that's kind of how I'm thinking. But as far as the answer to the question, how do they perceive Morathi? They view Morathi as Khaine incarnate, right? A god has descended on foot into the mortal realms, and he took the form of Morathi. My next question here was, has the news or any ripple effects of her siege of Anvilgard reached anywhere, right? Where did that, because that's really where Broken Realms Morathi ends, is with Anvilgard being totally captured. There's a few loose ends with some characters there, but that's about it. Are there any consequences for the other cities? Because if the Daughters of Khaine have temples all over the place, integrated with cities of Sigmar and that kind of stuff. They're a known quantity amongst the realms. Well, sadly, this is the one downside to bringing the lore up to the current place, is that not really. We don't really actually know. What we do know is that when Morathi took Anvilgard, she gave orders specifically: no one is allowed to kill a Stormcast Eternal. You have to subdue them and put them in a prison. The reason for that was, if any Stormcast was to die, they would arc back to Azir and then tell them what's going on. So the idea was, don't let any of them die. That way there's no messengers, no escape. And so the way that the book ends that kind of story section is by basically saying there is a media blackout in Anvilgard. There's no information coming or going. It's totally blacked out. And so at this point, Morathi is kind of going under the radar. The Sigmar doesn't know, within the context of their specific battle tome, what has transpired. We're going to skip right over the fact that literally earlier in that same book, Broken Realms Morathi, the Stormcast killed himself to go back and, deliver a warning to Azir. And there's absolutely no reason why that plot device couldn't be used twice, but we're going to skip right past that. So to answer the question succinctly, no repercussions yet because it hasn't become widely known. Now again, this is the Daughter of Khaine specific battle tome. I would kind of more expect that, kind of meta-narrative stuff to happen in Broken Realms, the actual books, campaign books, or in Black Library novels, that kind of stuff. So I wasn't expecting much, but just to let you know, that's where the story ends. And my last question here was, has her ascension changed the faction personality and that kind of stuff, right? Never mind just how people view Morathi, internally. I mean, externally, there's nothing yet because the news has not reached anywhere according to the overarching narrative. But internally, are things different? And to that, I would say, yeah, sort of. I mean, they're still, bikini-clad murder blenders that are going out into the realms and doing it for the sake of Khaine, which, of course, is now, they perceive it as Morathi. I guess, at its most simple level, I guess the only real difference is that now they feel like they have a personification of Khaine walking amongst them, but that's really the only difference. It's still all in service to Khaine. They just view Morathi as the living conduit instead of just the representative. However, There are a few other things here. See, since Morathi ascended to godhood, a few changes have gone down. For example, the appearances of Melusai and Khaine have grown drastically. There's just more of them. She's creating more of her children and kind of inserting them in all different kinds of places in societies. In addition to that, not only are the Scathborn, which are the ones who are kind of mutated in some way, bat ladies or snake ladies, the Scathborn for the longest time have been largely hidden and concealed. They didn't want to freak out anybody else in any of the other cities or that kind of stuff. One thing that is noted is that the Scathborn are more numerous and more present, meaning like they're just letting themselves, like basically snake ladies going down the street and be like, what are you going to do? You don't like me? You don't think I should be here? Let's drop bombs. You know what I mean? Like just very like in your face. It used to be this big dark secret. Now it's just kind of like common knowledge. And in addition to that, the blood magics and rituals and that kind of stuff that have, supposedly been feeding Khaine for the longest time and are now directly feeding Morathi and her godhood, they've become more powerful and more potent. And this is why the lore justification for why when the book came out, we got endless spells and an endless prayer sort of thing. Just representations of, her specific style of magic and sorcery and blood sacrifice becoming more prevalent, more intense, and more focused. Now, I have a few thoughts on here, because I do find this to be an incredibly interesting story and with minor updates and changes, but I think they have some cool impact. And we're going to talk about those things, why this story is so cool, right after a quick word from our sponsor. Hey Wargamers, so in my Age of Sigmar lore videos, I cover like a myriad of different kinds of locations. Got stuff like haunted forests, graveyards, dangerous mountain passes, chaos fortresses, bastions of order, all that kind of stuff. But coming up and designing with those kinds of environments for storytelling and creating a feel for your game can actually be quite a bit of a challenge, and that applies both to tabletop gaming and role-playing games. And so I wanted to introduce you to a book, a huge resource that I like, called Dangerous Destinations. This is a sort of a narrative supplement that goes a long way to helping you build creative and intensely interesting spaces within the world that you want to play in. It works with any role-playing game or miniatures game because it's really just narrative prompts to create a really nice story setting. And like I said, it works with games like Soulbound, D&D, Warhammer Fantasy Battles, the role-playing one. Now, this book includes beautiful artwork, narrative hooks, environmental clues, savage enemies, and kind of like surreal ambience. Now, they've already crushed it on Kickstarter. That's not what this is. This is actually because they did so well that they're bringing it to market. And so this is actually a pre-order for a fully established company. They've actually had multiple books in the past that all went out like gangbusters on Kickstarter and in stores. So they know what they're doing. Incredible detail to, the world building and things like that. If you'd like to order your own copy of Dangerous Destinations, they have it in PDF and hard copy. You can go ahead and get the link down below. That'll let them know that I sent you, and it goes a long way to helping me and them. So check out Dangerous Destinations and begin exploring your new favorite place today. Now, back to the show. So why is this so cool? What about these updates? Even though I didn't have to do a whole lore week because nothing was grandiose rewritten, why do these things still matter? I often mention in these kind of videos that lore doesn't change much from battle tome to battle tome, right? You're going to see that witch elves do X in one battle tome, and it's not like when you get a new edition, boom, oh, they're totally different now, right? Unit to unit, the lore stays very similar. But what I can say about this book is that the style of writing and articulating how those units act, it just does a great job, right? Even if they fill the same role within an army, the writing is always improving. There's giving more context. They're making these warriors seem much more grounded in the setting. And so that's something that I noticed. I noticed it first, actually, with the Skaven battle tome a while back, where the Pestilence clan parts that were rewritten when they got kind of subsumed into Skaven as a whole, I thought they were extremely well done. And so I've been kind of keeping an eye on that as I look at the newer battle tomes. It's always getting tighter. The lore is more interesting, more in-depth. And I feel like in this one, the answers to my questions were much more easy to find, right? I just like the old battle tomes, at least older ones, they can be a tough one to be like, okay, but how do these units think about blank, right? Well, in this one, I really did like the fact that I feel like they kind of highlighted, or at least stuck out some of those answers. I feel like I didn't have to look very hard to be like, the elves think Morathi is Khaine, reborn, right? She's not just the prophetess. Morathi, for all intents and purposes, is gone. Khaine now walks among us. My God walks with me, kind of a thing. That was easy to find. I love that. And I think it also changes dramatically sort of I guess the intensity and zealotry within their faction. Like, can you imagine, let's kind of take this the other way. Imagine if the Fire Slayers had that, right? What if Games Workshop, we'll hop in our way back machine in a time machine, and they do what they should have done, and they made Gotrek the living incarnation of Grimnir. Grimnir new, right? 2.0. What would that faction do? That is essentially what's happening here, where their whole society and their whole artifice and what they do day to day and how they worship and how they work with other factions. It's a cult. It's all centered around this one truth of we need to get our god back, that god being Khaine in this example versus Grimnir for the Fire Slayers. But what if you get what you want, right? Of course, you and I know that they didn't really. Khaine didn't come back. It's just Morathi doing despicable things to attain personal power, but they don't know that. And so seeing how their culture changes in future Black Library novels, or really any short story that has them with the understanding that Khaine is Morathi, is going to be very interesting to see. As far as ramifications and that kind of stuff, I wasn't necessarily expecting them to drop, meta-narrative is what I'll call it. Big story stuff is like, I don't expect to find Sigmar's response to Morathi in this battle tome. I would expect to find that in a Black Library book or a narrative supplement like Broken Realms, style campaign book, that kind of stuff. But I wanted something a little bit more, even just a cliffhanger of but she doesn't know what information got out kind of a thing. I feel like it was very nah, she totally nailed it. She swept it under the rug. Nobody knows a thing about what's going on. It's that's not technically true. I wanted a little bit more, but whatever. What is interesting, though, and I talked earlier about the improved writing. One of the things that I love about this is that because they brought the story up to the current point, okay, we had a chance to see Morathi put a cunning plan, using and manipulating people and stealing whatever she wants and that kind of stuff into motion. Before, it was just words about oh yeah, Morathi in the old world, she was cunning and conniving, but we didn't literally see that. I feel like this battle tome does a fantastic job. If you didn't or don't want to read Broken Realms Morathi or any of those books, I feel like it does a really good job of succinctly putting her plan in place. And the reason that's important to me is because now we have a demonstrable way that she is cunning, conniving, and that kind of stuff, and very intelligent and how she manipulates people. So I feel like now we have evidence, and before we didn't, which actually means a lot to me. Because I feel like, there's going to be a point where the Broken Realms books, rules-wise, are obsolete. Okay, it's going to happen. It happens to every book. It's fine. But the thing is, I feel like the battle tome took away the important parts of that story about why Morathi is so cool, seeing as how she is undoubtedly going to be a fixture in this army for forever. I mean, it's Daughters of Khaine, but let's be honest, it's the Morathi faction at this point. And that's okay, and that's rad. But with that, in the battle tome, you have to give her justification for describing her as, cunning, manipulative, that kind of stuff, right? Kind of a show, don't tell thing, and I feel like they nailed that. But friends, that is just my opinion. I would love to hear yours. If you're a Daughters of Khaine player specifically, I'd love to hear your opinion on the lore changes. What do you think? And of course, they do leave tons of narrative room for the temples to respond differently. Some simply just refuse to acknowledge Khaine as a female form, so that everything is written in the masculine, kind of like how it traditionally has been before. Not necessarily that they don't recognize Morathi, but they kind of have their own depictions of Khaine. And then also some really don't like having the Scathborn, the Melusai, and the Khaine around. And so that is its own thing. So you could absolutely, you have the narrative freedom to make whatever kind of temple you want. You could have them, we don't like mutants. We don't like, we don't think Khaine's back, or we haven't heard the news. You can do whatever you want. There's a lot of freedom, but I do find the updates they put in there very intriguing, and I want to hear your thoughts on them. So tell me in the comments down below. We'll continue the conversation there. Thank you all so much for watching and listening, and happy wargaming.